It was Tuesday night, and Jake was driving his old Honda down Highway 95 in Nevada. He worked as a tech guy for the space agency, fixing computers and satellite equipment. Nothing too exciting, just a regular job that paid the bills. He was heading home after spending 3 days at a boring conference about communication systems. The desert stretched out on both sides of the road like a dark ocean. Jake had driven this route many times before, but tonight felt different somehow. The stars seemed brighter than usual. There wasn't another car in sight for miles. Then his car started making that terrible grinding sound again. He'd been putting off getting it fixed for weeks, and now he was paying for it. Steam started rising from under the hood, and the temperature gauge shot up into the red zone. Jake pulled over to the side of the empty highway and turned off the engine. "Great, just great," he muttered, getting out of the car. The desert air was cool and quiet, almost eerily so. He popped the hood and saw what he expected. Coolant everywhere and the smell of something burning. His phone showed no signal. Of course, he was stuck in the middle of nowhere. Jake called the roadside assistance number from memory, hoping someone would pick up despite the poor connection. After several tries, he finally got through and was told it would be at least 2 hours before anyone could reach him. He grabbed a bottle of water from his car and sat on the hood. Looking up at the incredible star display above, that's when he noticed something odd. 3 lights in the sky were moving in a perfect triangle formation. As someone who worked with aircraft communications, Jake knew every type of plane and helicopter that flew in this area. These lights moved too smoothly, too quietly. They seemed to pulse with a soft blue-white glow that was unlike any navigation lights he'd ever seen. The lights grew larger and brighter as they came closer. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. In all his years working with space technology, he'd heard stories from pilots and radar operators, but he'd never seen anything like this himself. The 3 lights suddenly merged into one large, oval-shaped craft that made absolutely no sound as it descended. Jake wanted to run, but his legs felt frozen. The craft was beautiful in a way that didn't make sense. It looked like it was made of some kind of metal that seemed to flow like water, reflecting the starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. It settled down in the desert about 50 yards away, as gently as a feather landing on water. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Jake stood perfectly still, not sure if he should hide behind his car or wave hello. His mind was racing with all the things he'd been taught about first contact procedures at work, but none of that training seemed to matter now. This was real, and he was completely unprepared for it. A section of the craft's surface simply faded away, like a door made of light. Jake squinted, trying to see inside, but the interior was too bright. Then a figure stepped out, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. She looked human at first glance, but there were differences that made it clear she was something else entirely. Her skin had a subtle glow to it, like she was lit from within by some gentle light source. She was tall and moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity. Her hair was long and appeared to shift color slightly as she walked, sometimes silver, sometimes a pale blue. But what struck Jake most was her expression. Even from a distance, he could see that she looked lost, confused, and deeply sad. Clothes seemed to be made of the same flowing material as her ship, and they moved around her like she was underwater. She walked toward him slowly, and Jake could see her more clearly with each step. Her eyes were larger than human eyes, with an unusual depth to them that made him feel like he was looking into deep space. Her features were elegant and otherworldly, but there was something about her face that reminded him of classical paintings of princesses from fairy tales. When she was about 10 feet away from him, she suddenly stopped. Her large eyes filled with tears that seemed to catch and reflect light like tiny stars. Then, without any warning, she ran the last few steps toward him and collapsed against his chest, her arms wrapping around him as she began to sob. Jake stood there in complete shock, his arms automatically coming up to steady this mysterious being who was now clinging to him like her life depended on it. Her tears were warm against his shirt, and he could feel her whole body shaking with the force of her crying. But the strangest thing was that her tears seemed to glow with a soft, pearl-like light that was visible even in the darkness. He wanted to ask who she was, where she came from, why she was crying, but somehow he knew that words wouldn't work. Instead, he just held her gently and let her cry against his shoulder, feeling like he was living in the most impossible dream of his life. The desert around them was silent except for her quiet sobs and the gentle humming sound coming from her ship. As Jake looked down at this mysterious woman in his arms, he realized that his boring, ordinary life had just taken a turn into something extraordinary. Whatever was happening, whatever had brought her here, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Jake stood there, holding this mysterious woman, feeling completely lost. She was still crying against his chest, and he could feel the warmth of her glowing tears soaking through his shirt. He wanted to comfort her somehow, but how do you talk? To someone who might not even speak English? How do you help someone who traveled across space to get here? "Hey, it's okay," he whispered softly, the way he might speak to a frightened animal. "You're safe now." She looked up at him with those incredible eyes, and something amazing happened. Jake felt a gentle warmth spreading through his mind, like someone had just turned on a soft light in a dark room. Suddenly, he wasn't just looking at her face anymore. Pictures started flowing into his thoughts, clear as watching a movie. He saw massive cities made of crystal and light, stretching up toward purple skies. Flying vehicles moved between towering spires that seemed to grow like trees rather than being built. Gardens floated in the air, filled with plants that glowed in colors he'd never seen before. It was the most beautiful place he could imagine, but there was something wrong with the picture. The city felt empty, lonely, like everyone had left. More images came flooding in. He saw her standing in what looked like a throne room, wearing flowing robes that sparkled like stardust. People who looked similar to her were bowing, treating her with the kind of respect you'd show a queen or princess. But Jake could feel her emotions along with the images, and she wasn't happy about any of it. She felt trapped, burdened by something heavy that he couldn't quite understand yet. The strangest part was that Jake somehow knew she was showing him these things on purpose. This wasn't just his imagination running wild. She was actually putting these thoughts into his head, communicating with him in a way that was more direct than words could ever be. "You're a princess," he said out loud, and she nodded. Ow. Fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. Through this weird mental connection, Jake learned her name was Lyra. The sounds didn't quite match any language he knew, but somehow he understood exactly how to say it. She came from somewhere so far away that even light would take thousands of years to travel between her world and Earth. But why was she here? Why was she crying like her heart was breaking? Amor. Pictures filled his mind, and these ones were harder to handle. Jake saw Lyra sitting alone in beautiful rooms, surrounded by luxury but looking miserable. He felt echoes of emotions that weren't his own, waves of sadness, pain, and fear that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then he understood something that made his stomach drop. Lyra wasn't just sad about her own problems. She was feeling the sadness of everyone around her, not just the people in her palace, but everyone on her entire planet. It's not just her planet, but other worlds too. Somehow, she could feel the emotions of every living thing across huge distances in space. Jake tried to imagine what that would be like. Think about feeling every person's worst day, every moment of grief, every time someone lost someone they loved, all happening inside your head at the same time. It would be like having the emotional pain of billions of people all crushing down on you at once. "That's impossible," Jake whispered. But even as he said it, he could feel that it was true. Through their connection, he experienced just a tiny taste of what she went through every day, and it was overwhelming. He had to step back and take several deep breaths to handle even that small sample. Lyra wiped her eyes and tried to show him more. In her world, this ability made her incredibly valuable as a leader. She could sense when people were unhappy, when they needed help, when something was wrong, anywhere in her empire. Her people saw it as a gift from the universe, a sign that she was meant to rule and protect them, but they didn't understand the cost. They didn't know that she never got a moment of peace, never got to turn off the constant flow of everyone else's emotions. Every celebration she felt was mixed with someone else's tragedy. Every moment of joy was poisoned by distant suffering that she couldn't ignore or fix. She had tried to explain it to her advisors, her family, her friends. But how do you describe something that no one else had ever experienced? They would nod and say they understood, then ask her to use her gift to help solve the next crisis. They needed her to be strong, to be their emotional compass. But no one ever asked if she was okay. That's why she had stolen away in the middle of the night. Taking one of their fastest ships and running as far as she could, Earth was supposed to be different. Her people had been watching this planet for a long time. They always described humans as simple, primitive creatures with basic emotions. Lyra hoped that being around simpler feelings might give her some peace. But she was wrong. As soon as she got close to Earth, she realized that humans felt things more intensely than almost any species she'd ever encountered. People on this planet loved harder, grieved deeper, and hoped stronger than most beings in the galaxy. Instead of finding peace, she found herself drowning in the emotional energy of 8 billion human hearts. Jake felt her exhaustion, her desperate need for just one quiet moment where she didn't have to carry everyone else's pain. She had come here looking for healing, but instead found herself more overwhelmed than ever. "Why don't you just go back home?" Jake asked gently. Through their connection, she showed him the answer, and it made his blood run cold. Something terrible was coming, something that threatened not just her world, but Earth too. And somehow, her being here was connected to that danger. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he sensed the fear in Lyra's mind. Whatever was coming had her absolutely terrified, and if someone who could travel between stars was scared, that was bad news for everyone. "What kind of danger?" he asked. Though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer, Lyra closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. When she opened them again, Jake could see her preparing to share something that was clearly painful for her to even think about. The mental connection between them grew stronger, and suddenly Jake was seeing the universe through her eyes. He found himself looking at a star map that stretched across impossible distances. Thousands of worlds sparkled like jewels against the darkness, each one representing billions of lives. But as Jake watched, some of those lights were going out. Not dimming, but completely disappearing. As if they had never existed at all. Through Lyra's memories, Jake experienced what it felt like when an entire planet full of people simply stopped existing. One moment she could feel the emotions of everyone living there, their hopes, fears, love, and dreams, all flowing through her mind like a distant song. Then, in an instant, there was nothing. Complete silence where millions of voices used to be. The first time it happened, Lyra thought, something was wrong with her abilities. Maybe she was sick, or maybe her gift was finally burning itself out from overuse. But then, her people's long-range sensors confirmed the horrible truth. The planet was still there physically, but it was completely lifeless. It's not just dead, but empty in a way that seemed impossible. "It's like something ate their souls," Jake whispered, and Lyra nodded sadly. More planets followed. Always in the same pattern, thriving worlds full of life would suddenly go silent, leaving behind empty rocks floating in space. Lyra's scientists studied the phenomenon for months, sending robot ships to investigate. What they found made no sense according to any science they knew. The planets looked normal from the outside. Cities were still standing, forests were still green, oceans still held water. But every living thing was gone, not dead, gone. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no evidence of what had happened. It was as if every conscious being had simply vanished into thin air. The worst part for Lyra was that she could feel it happening each time. Because of her connection to all living things, she experienced the final moments of entire civilizations. She felt their confusion, their terror, and then the awful emptiness that followed. Each time a world went silent, a piece of her died. With it, Jake watched through her memories, as her people tried to understand what was causing this. Their best scientists worked day and night, analyzing energy patterns and studying the empty worlds. What they discovered was more terrifying than anything they could have imagined. Something was moving through space, traveling from galaxy to galaxy like a cosmic storm. But this wasn't a natural disaster or some kind of space weather. This thing was intelligent, and it was hunting. It seemed to feed on consciousness itself, drawn to worlds with the most complex emotions and thoughts. The entity moved slowly by space standards, taking years to travel between star systems. But it was incredibly thorough once it found a galaxy. With life, it would systematically visit every inhabited world, consuming all conscious beings before moving on to the next target. Lyra's people called it the Void Hunter, though that name didn't really capture what it was. Through her abilities, she could sense it from incredible distances, a hole in the fabric of existence that swallowed not just lives, but the very possibility of life. It left behind a kind of spiritual emptiness that made her physically sick to even think about. The really terrifying part was how it chose its targets. The Void Hunter was attracted to strong emotions, especially complex feelings like love, hope, and creativity. Worlds with simple life forms were often ignored. But planets with advanced civilizations that created art, music, and literature were irresistible to it. Earth, Jake realized, with growing horror, was exactly the kind of world this thing would. Want to devour through their connection? Lyra showed him how her people had tracked the entity's path. It had already consumed 3 entire galaxies, leaving behind billions of empty worlds. Now it was heading toward the Milky Way, drawn by the incredible emotional energy generated by all the different species living here. But what made it even worse was that Earth stood out like a beacon. Humans felt emotions more intensely than almost any other species Lyra's people had ever discovered. The combination of love, anger, joy, sorrow, hope, and fear that came from 8 billion human hearts created a signal so bright that the Void Hunter had changed course specifically to target this solar system. "We tried to hide your world, Lyra," explained through their mental link. "My people have been working for decades to mask Earth's emotional signature, to make it invisible to the Hunter. But humans keep growing, keep feeling more deeply, keep creating more complex art and music and stories. You shine so brightly in the cosmic darkness that we can't hide you anymore." Jake felt sick to his stomach. Humanity's greatest strengths. Their capacity for love, their creativity, their ability to hope, even in the darkest times, were exactly what was going to get them all killed. But there was something else in Lyra's thoughts, something that made her cry even harder. She wasn't just sad about the approaching danger. She was carrying a crushing weight of guilt about something she had done, some choice she had made that changed everything. "What aren't you telling me?" Jake asked gently. Lyra looked up at him with those incredible eyes, and Jake saw the truth that was breaking her heart. In her desperation to save Earth, to protect the humans she had grown to love through her empathic connection, she had made a decision that would doom her own people. Instead, and the worst part was, she wasn't even sure it would work. Jake could feel Lyra's guilt eating away at her like acid. Through their mental connection, he sensed that whatever decision she had made was tearing her apart from the inside. Her tears weren't just from the weight of feeling everyone's pain. Anymore, they were tears of shame. "Tell me what you did," Jake said softly. Holding her steady as another wave of emotion crashed over her, Lyra pulled back slightly and looked into his eyes. For a moment, Jake thought she might run back to her ship and disappear forever. But then she took a deep breath and opened her mind completely, showing him everything. The memory started in what looked like a massive council chamber on her home world. Hundreds of her people sat in curved rows, all of them looking desperate and afraid. These weren't ordinary citizens. Jake could tell these were the smartest minds in their civilization. Scientists and leaders who had spent their entire lives solving impossible problems. Through Lyra's eyes, Jake watched as holographic displays showed the Void Hunter's approach. The entity was still years away, but its path was clear. It would reach the outer edges of the Milky Way soon, and when it did, every world with intelligent life would be consumed. Earth would be one of the first targets because of how brightly human emotions shone in the cosmic darkness. "We've tried everything," an elderly scientist was saying. "Energy shields, cloaking devices, even relocating entire populations to hidden worlds. Nothing works. The Hunter finds consciousness wherever it exists." Jake felt Lyra's frustration as she listened to the same arguments they'd been having for months. Her people were brilliant, but they thought like scientists and engineers. They wanted to build something, or discover some new technology that could stop an entity that seemed to exist beyond the normal laws of physics. But Lyra's gift had shown her something different. Through her connection to all living beings, she had sensed the hunter's true nature. It wasn't just attracted to consciousness, it was attracted to the emotional networks that connected conscious beings together. Like a predator that hunted by following scent trails, the Void Hunter tracked the invisible bonds of empathy and love that linked minds across space, that gave her an idea that terrified even herself. What if we could redirect it? She had asked the council. Instead of trying to hide or fight something we don't understand, what if we gave it a different target? The room fell silent as everyone stared at her. Through the memory, Jake felt Lyra's heart pounding as she prepared to suggest something that went against every value her people held dear. The hunter follows emotional connections, she continued. It's drawn to the strongest networks of feelings. In relationships, if we could create a more attractive target somewhere else, we might be able to lead it away from the populated areas of our galaxy. An older council member leaned forward. What kind of target could be more attractive than Earth? Human emotions burn brighter than almost anything we've ever detected. Lyra's next words had changed everything. My home system. If I returned there and used my abilities to amplify the emotional connections of our people, I could make our worlds shine even brighter than Earth does. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could feel the horror and admiration warring in the minds of everyone present. What Lyra was suggesting would save Earth and countless other worlds, but it would doom her own people instead. You're talking about making yourself bait, someone whispered. I'm talking about making a choice, Lyra had replied. The hunter will consume billions of lives no matter what we do. The question is whether we let it pick its own targets, or whether we guide it toward worlds that are prepared to face it. Through the memory, Jake watched as arguments broke out across the chamber. Some of her people called her plan heroic. Others called it monstrous. But underneath all the debate, Jake could sense something else: relief. Relief that someone else was willing to make the impossible choice so they didn't have to. In the end, her people had agreed to let her try, not because they thought it was right, but because no one could come up with a better option. They would evacuate as many of their own people as possible to distant colonies, while Lyra would remain behind and use her abilities to create an emotional beacon so bright that the hunter couldn't ignore it. But that wasn't the worst part of her plan. And Jake could feel there was more she hadn't shown him yet. Ouch, there's something else, isn't there? He asked. Fresh tears rolled down Lyra's cheeks as she revealed the final piece of her strategy. Even if her plan worked, even if she successfully redirected the hunter away from Earth, there was no guarantee it would stop there. After consuming her homeworlds, the entity might simply continue on to Earth anyway, so Lyra had made an even more desperate choice. She would use her empathic abilities not just to attract the hunter, but to try to merge with it when it arrived. If she could somehow connect with its consciousness, maybe she could understand it well enough to stop it permanently. No? Or maybe she could confuse it, make it lose interest in hunting altogether. It's basically a plan to commit suicide, Jake said, the words coming out harsher than he intended. Lyra nodded miserably. I've been studying the hunter through my abilities, trying to understand what it really is. I think it might have once been like me, a being with too much empathy, who felt too much pain from the universe around them. Maybe it started consuming consciousness as a way to make the suffering stop. The idea sent chills down Jake's spine. What if the Void Hunter was just another version of Lyra, someone whose gift had driven them insane over countless years? What if her plan to merge with it would just create an even more powerful monster? But I had to try something, she continued through their connection. I couldn't just stand by and watch while it destroyed world after world. Even if my plan doesn't work, at least I'll have tried to save as many people as possible. Jake felt the full weight of her sacrifice now. She had left her home, her people, and her entire civilization behind, knowing she would never see them again. She had come to Earth not as a refugee, but as someone taking a final look at the world she was trying to save, before going back to face certain death. That's why she was crying. Not just from the pain of feeling everyone's emotions, but from the knowledge that she was saying goodbye to everything beautiful in the universe. She was looking at Earth through the eyes of someone who knew they were about to die, trying to memorize every precious moment of life and love and hope before it was too late. And the worst part was, Jake was starting to realize that her plan might be the only chance any of them had. Jake stood there in the desert holding Lyra, his mind racing with everything she had shown him. This alien princess had given up everything to try to save a world she'd only watched from far away. She was planning to go back home and basically kill herself to protect 8 billion people she'd never even met. "There has to be another way," Jake said, surprising himself with how determined he sounded. "You can't just throw your life away like this." Lyra looked up at him with those incredible eyes. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Jake saw something other than sadness in them. There was a tiny spark of hope, as if his words had lit a small candle in a very dark room. "I've been thinking about this for months," she said through their mental connection. "My people's best scientists couldn't find another solution. What could possibly change now?" But Jake was already getting an idea, and it was crazy enough that it might actually work. His job involved communication systems, connecting different networks so they could work together instead of separately. What if they could apply that same principle here? You said the hunter feeds on consciousness, right? It's attracted to emotional connections between living beings? Ara nodded, not sure where he was going with this. What if instead of making yourself bait, we made the connections stronger? What if we linked every conscious being in the galaxy together so tightly that the hunter couldn't consume any of us without choking on all of us at once? Through their link, Jake felt Lyra's mind racing as she considered the possibility. Her empathic abilities let her feel emotions across vast distances. But what if that power could be shared? What if every person on every world could suddenly feel connected to everyone else? "It would be like trying to eat a meal that's bigger than your stomach," Jake continued, getting more excited as the idea developed. The hunter might be powerful, but could it really consume the combined consciousness of an entire galaxy all at once? Lyra's expression was changing from hopeless to thoughtful. "My abilities work because I can create bridges between minds," she said slowly. "But I've never tried to connect more than a few people at once. The kind of network you're talking about would involve trillions of beings." "But you wouldn't have to do it alone," Jake pointed out. "What about others like you? There have to be other people in the galaxy with empathic gifts, right?" She nodded. "There are others, but none as strong as mine, and most of them can only connect with their own species." Jake thought about that for a moment. What if that's actually perfect? What if we created a chain reaction? Connect to the strongest empaths on different worlds. They connect to others of their kind, and so on, until everyone is linked together. The more they talked about it, the more possible it seemed. Instead of hiding from the Void Hunter or trying to fight it, they could create something it had never encountered before, a galaxy-wide network of connected consciousness that was too big and complex for it to consume. But there was still one huge problem. For the plan to work, Lyra would need to be at the center of the network, acting as the main connection point between all the different species. The strain of linking that many minds together might kill her just as surely as her original plan would have. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly, "and yes, it might destroy me. But at least this way, if I don't survive, the network might continue without me. Everyone would stay connected to each other." Jake shook his head. "That's not good enough. We need to find a way to keep you alive, too." Then he had another idea, one that made his heart beat faster. What if you didn't have to carry the whole load yourself? What if you had help from someone who could share the burden? "What do you mean?" Jake took a deep breath. "You said your abilities work by creating bridges between minds. Well, you've already created a bridge between your mind and mine. What if we made that connection permanent? What if I helped you carry some of the weight?" Lyra's eyes went wide. "That's impossible. You're human. Your brain isn't designed to handle empathic connections on that scale. It could kill you." "Maybe," Jake admitted, "but maybe not. Humans are tougher than you think. We've survived ice, ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that should have wiped us out completely. Our brains might be more flexible than your people realize." Through their link, he could feel her considering the possibility. The idea scared her, but it also filled her with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Real hope, even if it worked. She said, "Even if we managed to connect every conscious being in the galaxy, how do we know it would stop the hunter? What if it just makes things worse?" Jake smiled. "'Cause I think you were right about what the hunter really is. You said it might be someone like you, someone whose empathy drove them crazy from feeling too much pain. But what if instead of just pain, it suddenly felt all the love and joy and hope in the galaxy too? What if it remembered what it was like to feel good emotions?" The idea sent a wave of excitement through both of their minds. Instead of trying to destroy the Void Hunter, they might be able to heal it. If they could surround it with enough positive emotions, love, friendship, creativity, hope, maybe they could remind it what it felt like to be truly alive instead of just consuming life. "It's crazy," Lyra whispered. "The best plans usually are," Jake replied. They spent the next hour working out the details. Lyra would return to her people and explain the new plan. Instead of evacuating their worlds, they would stay and help coordinate the galaxy-wide network. Jake would come with her, acting as her anchor point and helping to distribute the mental load. It wouldn't be easy. They would need to contact empaths on thousands of different worlds, convince entire civilizations to trust each other, and create the largest connection of minds in the history of the universe. And they would have to do it all before the Void Hunter arrived, but for the first time since she'd discovered the approaching threat, Lyra felt like they had a real chance of success. More than that, she felt like she wasn't alone anymore. Whatever happened, she would face it with someone who cared about her, someone who was willing to risk everything to help save not just his own world, but hers too. As they walked toward her ship together, Jake looked up at the stars and realized that his boring, ordinary life was over forever. He was about to become part of the most important mission in galactic history. And somehow, that felt exactly right. The princess had stopped crying, and for the first time in years, she was smiling. They had found hope in the darkness, and together, they might just save the universe.